Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you to this session of our Islam Studies Circle. The Quranic verse that we are going to study today, in fact, are 5 verses. These have been taken from Surah Ala, the 87th verse of the Quran. I'll read out these verses before you and then translate them. قد أفلح من تزكى وذكر اسم ربه فصلى بل تؤثرون الحياة الدنيا والآخرة خير وأبقى. In the hereafter, successful shall be he who purified his soul and remembered his Lord's name, then prayed. No, in fact, you give preference to this worldly life, even though the life to come is better and more lasting. Viewers, I have titled this set of verses as spiritual advancement because, as you know, the word tazakka or tazkiyah or words of similar import, they are actually used by the Quran for spiritual advancement, and it is this spiritual advancement, it is self-purification, which is the basis of salvation in the hereafter. So the salvation which is to be achieved by a person in the hereafter is, as you can see, has been mentioned in the past tense, and the reason for mentioning it in the past tense simply is because of the fact that something which is certain is mentioned many a time in the Quran in the past tense. So in order to express the certainty of an event, at times future events are referred to in the past tense as if they have already happened, in order to connote their certainty and the fact that they will always take place. So it says that a person who remembers the name of his Lord and for this he prayed, and then he prayed, he is the person who actually has succeeded. Of course, this has been coordinated to the clause man tazakka, that he who purified himself, he has succeeded, and for this purification, the all-important thing is that he remembered his Lord's name and also prayed. And remember that this is something which we have to always keep in mind and bear in mind, that remembering God's name does not mean that we start remembering his name or repeating his name several times on beads, as is generally the case. Actually, what is meant here is that you have to remember the attributes of God, his practices, and the attributes and practices of God are those things which we need to remember. So do remember that whenever it is mentioned that you have to remember the name of God, it does not imply remembering his name or repeating his name over and over again. It actually implies that his personality, which is of course an embodiment of his attributes are to be remembered. And of course, then the all-important thing is that a person who has to purify himself must pray. Now, there are several things which have therefore been mentioned here in the Quran. That the first thing is that a person who has purified himself is the person who can be really classified as the person who has succeeded in the hereafter. And he is the person who has remembered his Lord's name and he has prayed to the Lord. First of all, it needs to be understood that tazkiyah or self-purification is not something which is extraneous to what the Quran actually calls as the content of religion. So if we study the Quran, we'll find out that the content of religion, which is of course Sharia and Hikmah. Sharia encompasses the law and the Hikmah encompasses the wisdom and of course the morality of religion. And this is we can say that that Islam is actually an amalgam of Sharia and Al-Hikmah. And if we adhere to the Sharia and Al-Hikmah, the consequence of this adherence is tazkiyah. This is how we understand that tazkiyah is not a separate activity that needs to be done. Tazkiyah is the consequence of religion. It is the result that we obtain if we follow religion. So we have to understand this in a very, very careful way, that tazkiyah is not what generally is understood, especially because of the fact that in the presence of the Sufi tradition, people think that sophistic methods and sophistic exercises and various activities are ones which provide us with tazkiyah. This is not the case. Unfortunately, this is a distortion of our Islamic purports and our injunctions. As I said, tazkiyah is basically the consequence of adhering to religion. And adhering to religion, of course, here means going by the precepts of Sharia. And the Sharia, of course, here is not used in its limited meaning as people generally understand it to mean Islamic punishments. Sharia has a wider scope. It refers to the laws of God, and these laws of God, they are laws which, when a human being comes into interaction with, they actually are meant to purify his dealings. Then these laws of God, this divine Sharia, relates to many affairs of his life, including worship. It includes the economic affair, the social affair, the political affair, of course, punishments as well, then etiquette that we have to adopt. And so it has a much wider implication. It refers to all those affairs in which a human being may interact with the Almighty. And al-hikmah, as I've just described, is the wisdom of religion, and it encompasses faith and morality. And faith, of course, refers to faith in God, faith in the angels, and in the hereafter, and in the books of God, and in the angels. So these are the precepts of faith. And morality, of course, is we all know is the outcome of good conduct. So good conduct and morality actually can be equated. So a person who adheres to Sharia and al-hikmah is a person who is going to purify himself. And amongst these acts, these are a couple of special ones which have been mentioned later, as is the case of the Quran, that after giving a special statement, a specific statement, it also gives a statement in which certain things need to be stressed upon. So although when it is said man tazakka, everything is covered in that, all good deeds are covered in that, but especially at times to highlight certain deeds, certain things are pointed out especially. And it is here that it is said that such a person remembers the Almighty. And as I said, remembering the Almighty here means remembering his attributes. Of course, when we say Alhamdulillah, Subhanallah, MashaAllah, all these are expressions which make us remember the Almighty. We thank Him. We actually think of Him whenever we are blessed with a lot of a good fortune. And then, of course, we seek forgiveness. We say Astaghfirullah. So all these expressions, Alhamdulillah, Astaghfirullah, A'udhu Billah, which means I seek your refuge, O Lord. All these expressions actually make us or bring us closer to the Almighty, and these are basically expressions, what we can call as remembering the Almighty. The prayer, of course, is that we all know is something which is the crux of religion. So if we simplify and in fact oversimplify, we can say that as far as beliefs are concerned, the basic belief is monotheism or tawheed. And as far as practices are concerned or deeds are concerned, the basic deed is the prayer. It is something which distinguishes us from other people. So prayer is something that has to be adhered to. Of course, this is something that we have been continuously discussing, and all the more necessary to see that how important it occupies a status in the religion of Islam, and as such in all religions, all Abrahamic religions, in fact. And then it is said that although this is the way to salvation, and people do not actually follow this way, and what is the reason that leads them away from this way? And it is here that the verses say, "Bal tu'thirun al-hayat ad-dunya." No, in fact, you give preference to this worldly life. "Wal akhiratu khayrun wa abqa." Even though the life to come is better and more lasting. So things which actually are a hindrance to our self-purification is this love for this worldly life. Of course, indulging ourselves in this worldly life is something which is allowed, of course, but indulging in it to the extent that you forget your responsibilities and start giving preference to this life, the priorities of this life over the priorities of the next life, is something which is of course not acceptable to the Almighty. So the biggest thing which stops us from self-purification, you can see has been mentioned very clearly in this verse, is that we give preference to a lot of things of this life and we forget the life hereafter, which is better and much more lasting. Now we come to the next part of our study circle, viewers, and this is the hadith of the day. This hadith is reported by Abu Huraira, and I have titled it as "Appearance Can Be Misleading." So the words are An Abi Huraira anna Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam قال رب أشعث مدفوع بالأبواب لو قسم على الله لأبره, which means Abu Huraira reported that God's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "Many a person with disheveled hair and laden with dust who are turned away from the doors are such that if they swear by God, God will fulfill their oaths." So you can clearly see, viewers, that the import of this hadith is that appearance can be misleading. Appearance is something which can always cause us to form an opinion which is contrary to reality. And here an example is given that at times you see a person with disheveled hair, he might not be properly dressed, or he might have an appearance in which he is laden with dust, and you form an opinion that he is an unworthy person, he is good for nothing. But then such is his stature that if he supplicates before God, the Almighty is going to fulfill whatever he supplicated for. Of course, implying the fact that he is held in high repute before the Almighty. So the most important thing that we need to realize is that one's appearance can always be misleading. One should not form an opinion about the other person simply by looking at how he or she appears by the face or by the dress that the person is wearing. That would be a very wrong conclusion. The real aspect of a person is his inner aspect, is his inner being. A person who is pure from his inside, a person who is able to be compassionate, kind, and of course sympathetic towards other people. He has an inner personality, an inner conduct, which might actually be different from what he appears from the outside. He could be appearing as a person who is not very pleasing to the eye. But we have to remember that a person is pleasing to the Almighty not because of his appearance or her appearance, but because of the person he or she is from inside. If he or she is a person who is kind-hearted, who is compassionate, who is selfless, altruistic, looks after others, always speaks the truth, has moral courage to side by the truth, these are the attributes of a person that are really worthy. And therefore, if we have to form an opinion about a person, it should be formed once a person has had exposure to that person. And this, of course, can only happen when we know how a person behaves in various circumstances that he comes across. It is a habit in our own society and in many Muslim societies as well that we actually gauge a person. We actually find a person pleasing to us or otherwise by looking at how he is dressed, by looking at how he appears to us or she appears to us. And this, of course, is something which is not correct. The standards of piety are not found in a person's appearance. The standards of morality do not lie in a person's appearance. It lies in his inner appearance, his inner self, how he is or she is from the inside. So therefore, this is something that constantly we must check in ourselves, that we must not form an opinion about a person, whether his complexion is different to us, whether his face is different that we don't like, whether he is or she is wearing something that we don't like. That should never be the case, never be the cause of forming an opinion. And so simple is this thing to follow. But the more simple it is, the more we neglect it. The more are we prone and inclined to form an opinion about a person from his appearance or her appearance. And this has to be really checked, and we must continue to chide ourselves and continue to caution ourselves that we must look at a person's inside. We must look at how he or she is from the inside and not from the outside. Now we go on to the third part of our study circle, which is the Bible verse of the day. And I have selected these two verses from the book of Proverbs, which is ascribed to the Prophet Solomon. And this is chapter number 1 of the book of Proverbs and verses 8 and 9. And I have actually titled it as Rights of Parents. So it goes like this: My son, give ear to the training of your father, and do not give up the teaching of your mother, for they will be a crown of grace for your head and chain ornaments about your neck. So this is basically an advice which is being given. It's a parental advice given to young people, and what is being said is that give ear, lend an ear to the teaching of the father and the teaching of the mother, because although they are advanced in age and they might not be in line with a lot of new trends, but remember, they are experienced. Remember that they have seen the world more than you, and they can offer advice which can be useful and really, really helpful. So the grown-ups or the children who have just entered adolescence in today's age, they think that they are capable enough of taking their own decisions. Okay, fine, they have this right to take a decision. But we have to remember that one of the bases of forming a decision is, of course, we are not bound by anyone's decision. The final decision has to come from us. But if we have to take a right decision, we must really reflect on what the right decision could be. And advice of elders, especially the parents, can really help because of the fact that they are more experienced, and above all, they are the best well-wishers a person can find. They really want their children to grow and develop and perform well and become high achievers in life. So the advice given by the parents is something that is of utmost importance. It might not be binding. It might not be something which a person is bound to follow, but he or she should lend an ear, should reflect on how your mother and father is advising you on a particular subject. And of course, we know that for importance, the two important areas of advice include spouse selection and career selection. And it is here that the parents do have a lot to say. But again, as far as giving advice to the children is concerned, it is, of course, something that they will do so naturally. But there's a word of caution here that we must try to understand, and that is that at times parents become authoritative. They impose their opinion on their children. They don't realize that their children are also grown-ups and have their own opinions. They might have a different worldview, a different political, a different religious, a different economic, a different social mindset or a worldview, and which, of course, they have the right to possess. At the same time, if children are being told that they must lend an ear to the advice of their parents, the parents also must need to realize that if they start pressing their advice too much, if they start imposing their advice, this is not going to help. And there are people who think that if the advice of the children, of the parents, is not followed, then they would be sinning. And I have repeatedly clarified here that some of the verses of the Quran that are used in its favor have an entirely different meaning. The Quran has not ever, not anywhere in its corpus, told us to obey our parents. What it has told us is that we have to be kind to our parents. وَبِالْ وَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. We must be kind to them. We must be sympathetic to them. We must deal with them in a very kind way. That's all what the Quran has said, and this is, of course, a huge thing as well. Obeying parents is a concept which is alien to the Quran. So with this, we have to understand that as far as the Quranic advice is concerned, or the advice of the scriptures is concerned, it has to be taken in line with one another. Although this is from the Proverbs, the book of Proverbs, but at the same time, we have to realize that parents have to be very, very cautious in giving their advice. They must not be repetitive in their advice. They must not be very imposing in their advice. They must not always taunt their children for this advice, because this is something which is going to be counterproductive. And when things get counterproductive, we can clearly see that the balance which is the beauty of religion is lost. So on the one hand, children have to lend an ear, and on the other hand, parents have to be wise and sagacious enough not to be too imposing, not to be authoritative and vindictive in their own decisions and in their own advice. Because we now come to the last part of our study circle, and of course, this is a small topic that we just talk about, and that is the importance of hobbies in life. So, we do talk about the fact that every person is blessed from the Almighty with some talent, and hobbies are one expression of a person's talent. So, for example, a person is a voracious reader, he could be a painter, he could be someone who loves plant life, he could be an animal lover, he could be a person who loves poetry, art, so many other things. So, when one does one's soul searching, one finds out that he or she is blessed by so many talents from the Almighty. And it is putting this talent to use that we must, because this is a way in which we can really pay back to the society that we live in. If we have good hobbies, it's going to affect our lives in two ways. It's going to make us better individuals because hobbies make us disciplined. They give us this fulfillment that I can do something. And then at the same time, the thing that a person does as a hobby is something constructive, something contributive. So the second thing is that that hobby can really contribute in the society that he or she lives in. And also, as we repeatedly discuss, that it is important that a person should have an aim in life. We must not be people who have aimless lives. We must be people who have an objective in life, a mission in life. And the one thing which can really help us in having that mission is the set of hobbies that we have. So we can pick and choose from the hobby that really enthralls us the most, that really engrosses us the most as perhaps one thing that we can really do very well in life. And if that passion can become one's profession, then there's nothing like it. Real wonders can be worked if a hobby or a passion can actually be transformed into a person's profession. And this is something that we must keep telling ourselves, whatever our age is no limitation. If we have something to contribute, whether we are a septuagenarian or an octogenarian or a young person or a middle-aged person, it doesn't matter. As long as we have a passion in life, a purpose in life, or a hobby in life, we can contribute to the society that we live in. And this is something, as I do say often, is one of the best antidotes to low feelings, to depressions, to things that we go along in life and get along in life today as the stresses and the duresses of life which make us bogged down. So one of the antidotes or counter to this situation is to have a very healthy hobby, a healthy mission in life. And this is something which can really, really be helpful to us. And we have to remember that as individuals, when we have landed upon the planet Earth and we've been sent down by the Almighty, all of us have been given certain set of abilities. At times, these abilities are blatant, very apparent, and at times you have to just look for them and search for them through introspection, through finding out what best is your own forte. And we have to realize that a person's best practice or a person's best hobby, which is actually his passion, is something which is a gift of God. It's something of a trust from the Almighty that we must keep using and trying to benefit, and also making others benefit from it. And of course, as I said, it keeps us busy, it keeps us involved in a lot of activities. And if we are able to transfer this legacy to our younger generation also, we can see how meaningful that society would become. A society in which every individual is trying to realize his potential, his latent potential, his apparent potential. A society in which every person is trying to contribute through his or her hobbies and best practices is going to be a society which is going to be a very healthy society, a society which is going to look after other people, a society which would be based on justice and equity, and a society which is going to be above all based on the basic human value of compassion. So, viewers, with these words, we come to an end to our study circle. And if there are any questions, please go ahead. I'm going to unmute your mic.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Hashim. Please go ahead.
Just want to know, because I was a bit late for the lecture, what was the Quranic verse that were discussed? The reference of that verse?
So the Quranic verse was Surah 87, which is Surah Ala, and the verses were 14 to 17. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى وَذَكَرَ اسْمَ رَبِّهِ فَصَلَّى. So these were the verses that we discussed, and the topic basically boiled down to spiritual advancement and self-purification.
Great. Okay, that's what I want to know. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. Okay, viewers, with this we come to an end to our study circle. Hope to see you all, inshallah, next week at the same time. And until then, it is Khuda Hafiz.